Hello and welcome to Heartbeat. This week, William sits down for a fascinating interview with Herb Geraghty from Secular Pro-Life USA. I'll bring you a roundup of news from home and abroad. And Catherine highlights the connection between grooming gangs and abortion.
Today I'm talking to Herb Geraghty of Secular Pro-Life, a US-based pro-life organisation which seeks to advance secular arguments against abortion. Secular Pro-Life exists, in their own words, to demonstrate that anyone can and everyone should oppose abortion. As well as talking about the organisation's work, I'll also be talking to Herb about what has been a tumultuous past couple of years on a personal level. In late 2022, Herb was indicted under the Biden-era FACE Act by the US Department of Justice for non-violent action at a Washington abortion facility. Herb faced a potential 11 years in jail, but ended up serving 17 months after receiving a pardon from President Donald Trump in January 2025, alongside 22 other pro-life activists. Thankfully then, Herb is now very much free and back to fighting for equal rights for the unborn. Herb, thank you for joining me. I'm going to talk to you shortly about the work of Secular Pro-Life, the work that you do. But firstly, can you tell our audience about the persecution that you personally faced at the hands of President Biden's US Department of Justice?
Yeah, sure. So in October of 2020, I participated in nonviolent direct action at a late-term abortion clinic in Washington, D.C. This is a clinic that it's run by Dr. Santangelo. He specializes in elective later abortions, post-viability on healthy babies in healthy mothers. Just sort of the most egregious, the run-of-the-mill, most pro-choice people recognize that this is wrong. It is a for-profit business. He is not helping women. He's butchering women. He's killed women. This is... it's a house of horrors. And so I participated in a direct action, a rescue there, wherein several people went to the clinic. Some stood outside, some occupied inside the clinic and did a nonviolent sit-in in the tradition of the civil rights movement within the United States, as well as the rescue movement and worldwide. History of civil disobedience we were inspired by. So we did that in October of 2020, and then several years later, sort of I think weeks after the Dobbs decision came out, they started filing indictments against people who were involved, and I was one of them. And so we were prosecuted, not with sort of trespassing or blocking ingress and egress, the types of charges that you get if you participate in a sit-in for a social justice cause. We were charged with federal laws, the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances, which is a law that exists to hyper-criminalize pro-life free speech, as well as federal conspiracy to deny civil rights. So I was facing up to 10 years, 11 years actually, in federal prison for what was a nonviolent sit-in. So I was actually I had a pretty minor criminal record, so I was only sentenced to 27 months in prison, a little over 2 years. My co-defendant, Lauren Handy, though, she was sentenced to 5.5 years.
Wow.
I think, yeah, five years, a couple months, for, again, non-violently occupying a late-term abortion clinic, a place where we know this man is violating federal laws related to the care of infants born alive during abortions. You can look this up. You can look up Justice for the Five and see the faces of some of his victims. I mean, it's horrific what he gets away with, and then we were charged with federal crimes. But about a year and a half into my sentence, I had already served 17 months. President Trump pardoned me on his third or fourth day in office. So I was able to go home. I had no plans for what the heck I was going to do because I planned on being in prison for the next year. My release date was November of this year. So I still should be in prison if it wasn't for President Trump.
That must have been some phone call.
Exactly. Well, it sort of rolled in slowly because You get in the federal prison system in the US, there's a very crappy messaging system. Like it
Yeah.
takes hours one way. They screen everything. You can't send pictures. You can't send emojis, which is not the biggest problem in the world, but was tough.
Yeah.
And I had to wait in line like 2 hours to get on the computer, fight to get it. It was
Wow.
a whole thing. And so I'm checking one day, and I check the computer, and I have like 6 messages that are all like, "I think you've been pardoned. I'm not sure. I'm confused. We don't know what's going on."
Amazing.
And then eventually the COs came and were like, "Pack your crap. You're going."
Brilliant.
So I got out, and so I sort of rolled out. I had no plan. They released me on the night of the March for Life, or the night before the March for Life. So I was able to get to DC, where our huge National March for Life is. And while I was there, I ran into Monica Snyder, who has been a longtime friend and the executive director of Secular Pro Life. And she was like, "What's your plan? What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't have a plan. My plan was to be in prison right now. I'm lost." And so I talked with her, and she gave me a job. And so now I get to be the chief communications officer at Secular Pro Life, which has been really exciting for me because I've been like a fan of Secular Pro Life for years. Like when I'm an atheist, and when I sort of became convicted about abortion when I was a teenager, I remember Googling like, "Can you be an atheist and pro-life?"
Yeah,
Because
literally.
saw no representation for that. And Secular Pro-Life came up, and I was like, "Oh, great. Like I'll hit the follow button, and I'm safe. I can keep being who I am."
Yes.
And so now, being an adult and getting to actually work with Monica and Teresa and Kelsey, the women who lead Secular Pro-Life, has been really exciting. And I've just been on board for a couple of months now because I just got out in January. So it's been exciting to join a team that I've respected for so long.
Fantastic. And that leads quite nicely onto this question then, Herb. Can you tell us about the motivation behind Secular Pro-Life being founded? And ultimately what the organization does?
Yeah, so we have a 3-pronged mission. The first is just to advance secular arguments against abortion, to represent the pro-life cause and the case for the unborn in a secular, pluralistic society. We also seek to create space within the mainstream pro-life movement for non-traditional pro-lifers. And I think when we were founded, we said for secular pro-lifers, for like ourselves. But we've found as we've grown that a lot of people who are attracted to us might not necessarily be atheists themselves, or a lot of people who are attracted to us are of minority religions. They're not Christian, and they don't necessarily feel like they fit in with the pro-life movement, but they're not an atheist. They're not secular. As well as, people who, regardless of faith background, might be LGBT or left wing or liberal leaning, or, things that don't necessarily traditionally jive with who shows up at a pro-life march. But we find that these people are, like myself, are super convicted about the cause of justice for the unborn, and they want to be involved. And so we try to make space in the movement and encourage people and mobilize people who might not otherwise feel like there's a place for them, to get them activated, because we recognize that everyone should be active in the cause of justice for the unborn. And then our third part of our mission is just to build coalitions. We find ourselves a lot of times bridging the gap between, these more non-traditional pro-life groups and more traditional pro-life groups. And we want to create interfaith coalitions. We don't care what you believe. Like we at Secular Pro-Life, we're run by atheists, but we are not evangelical about our atheism. Like we're not going to a pro-life conference trying to convince people to be atheists. That's not what we're about.
Separation. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for us, we are excited to work with anyone who sort of feels the same way. Like I respect it if you're praying for me, or if you want me to convert to what you believe. But at the end of the day, this is work. We have work to do. There are individual babies scheduled to die. There are women who are about to be exploited by the abortion industry. Like we can go out to coffee and talk about religion and politics and all the things we disagree on. But while there's something we do agree on, and it is an urgent need, we should work together. So that's what Secular Pro-Life does. And then in practice, we're online creating a lot of pro-life content. We're all over TikTok, Instagram, stuff like that, as well as, I go out, I speak to college students and participate in debates and represent to the media, and just try to make this case that abortion is the unjust killing of human beings, and it has no place in a just society.
Yes. You mentioned online engagement there. One thing that gets me, having a look at the kind of dialogues that secular pro-life have with people online, in the comments section, some of the charges you'll get are, you're not fully pro-life or you're not fully atheist. It's one or the other. But of course you're here saying, no, we are genuinely secular and we are genuinely pro-life.
Yeah. No, that's my favorite. I do get some pro-lifers who will say, you're not pro-life if you're an atheist. And to that I respond, okay, do more than me then, right? Like if you go out and be outside the clinic 7 days a week and activating and doing activism, go for it and do that, and then I won't have to. Like if every Christian was standing up and doing this work, I would let them do it and I would focus on something else I care about. But right now I see a lack. There's not enough people doing enough. That's why we still have 1 million abortions in this country every year. Like it is a crisis and we need everyone. I do think it's hilarious. We do get all the time, like, you're not really atheist, from fellow atheists who the assumption is that we're lying, that we're like scheming Christians.
Yes.
So that I always think is so funny, because I think if I were a Christian who just like for my own like political machinations was denying Christ in order to achieve some goal, like I would be a worse Christian.
Well, exactly.
Might as well just be an atheist at that point. So I don't think that's real. I don't think that there are a whole bunch of Christians going out there pretending not to be Christian. That's sort of like antithetical to the belief system. I find it funny when I get that, because it's like I can't prove I'm an atheist.
No.
Like it's, or I'll some sort of like I'll say God bless you or something when someone sneezes, and then I'm always like, oh gosh, they're gonna I think I'm lying. Just like a natural thing, or around Halloween, like there'll be something about ghosts, and I'll be like, so you believe in something spiritual, you're not an atheist. I'm like, I don't. It was a meme with a dog dressed as a ghost. Why are you stop yelling at me? But no, the point that we're trying to make is that abortion is a human rights issue. It's a social justice issue. Like, as a secular pro-life is single issue, but I have beliefs outside of abortion. Like, I'm extremely opposed to the death penalty. I'm a vegan. I think that Black Lives Matter, and I participated in anti-police brutality protests. And when I'm at something like that, no one ever comes up to me and they're like, but you're an atheist, so why do you believe that these people deserve rights? Like, and it's completely like no one asked that question, but with the unborn they do. They say, but you're an atheist, so why would you care about this?
Yes.
Because it's a human being. It's a human being being killed for no good reason, or no justified reason. And so I oppose it for the same reason I oppose the death penalty or police violence or anything that is an unjust killing of a human being.
Yes. Now, do you think there are things that pro-lifers of a religious persuasion, you've already alluded to this to a certain extent, can learn from secular pro-life and maybe apply when they're dialoguing with advocates of abortion?
No, I think that I encourage people to know your audience when you're making your arguments, right? So, if you are, talking with someone who's a member of your church, I wouldn't say use all the secular arguments. I would say, use the Bible to back you up. Like, if you have a shared belief system, use that. But the reality is we do live in a pluralistic society where there are a whole bunch of people who are not religious. And there's even more people who do identify as Christians, but they don't base their politics off of that. Like, take, again, disclaimer that secular pro-life is a single issue. We have people who disagree on plenty of issues, but, take something like same-sex marriage, where plenty of Christians oppose it. They would say, no, that's not marriage. That's not something that I believe as part of my life or part of my beliefs, but I don't want it to be illegal. Like, that's something that I hear all the time in the US, at least. I'm not sure what the debate is like in the UK, but that is the traditional, not traditional because it's new, but the mainstream belief. Like, that's what the polling indicates. And the thing is that I think that there's a lot of people who have beliefs like that, but they're not willing to impose them on someone else. Beliefs like murder and rape and theft, like violent crimes, those can be based on, secular moral intuition and philosophy, or they can be based on your Christian beliefs. Like, you can come to that position from either way. But something like murder, rape, assault, those can be violently enforced by the power of the state because they are violence against human beings. That's what makes it different than something like, like we can think lying or adultery are immoral, but very few people want you to face prison time if you
Yes.
are, committing a sin on that level, right? But abortion is different. It is much more analogous to something like murder, because it is, or assault, because it is, um, than something that is just bad or is just immoral. And I think that we sometimes, as a wider movement, don't do a good job of making that case. And it leads to people who even are Christian coming away thinking, well, this is just what my church believes. Like, I'm personally pro-life. I would never get an abortion, but it should be a right for other people. And you don't think that about crimes against human beings that are violent, unless you have in your soul, in your heart, dehumanized the victim of that crime. And I think that's what we do with the unborn. And so I think that I want, Christians, atheists, anyone, to be able to make arguments in a way that is accessible to everyone, because even if someone is Christian, that's not what they're basing their political ideology based off of. You need to be able to make the secular claims, because most people want to live in a secular pluralistic society. And I think that doesn't hurt us, because I think that the secular arguments are just as strong as the religious ones. Like, there are plenty of secular arguments against, domestic violence. We don't need to rely on the fact that it's a sin to beat your wife. We can just say it's wrong, and you can have any belief system
Yeah,
and agree with
demonstrably
that.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, the same is true for abortion. It is violence against an innocent child,
Yeah.
and therefore it should be illegal. And you don't need to cite the Bible to come to that conclusion. You can, if that's the basis of your beliefs, and it makes total sense if you're talking to someone with a shared belief system. But at the end of the day, our political system isn't going to be based on theology. And so we need to be able to make the strongest argument to the widest group of people.
Yes. Now, Herb, of course, as an atheist pro-lifer, as you say, you can't have that accusation that you do only believe in rights for the unborn from a religious persuasion. You can't have that accusation leveled at you. Do you think that's a helpful position to be in? Do you think it's good that you're immune from that charge?
Yeah, no, I do. Because I see my Christian friends like so frustrated by that accusation, right? Like, uh, of course, my belief in being pro-life, if you're Christian, comes from your worldview that there is a God and that life has value, right? But I can see that it's for the same reason that they oppose domestic violence, and they oppose, unjust war, and they, all of these things that they come and they're like, yeah, it's based because I think that human beings are important because of God, like that. But I often find pro-lifers aren't even making Christian arguments, and then they're getting that accusation immediately. Like, no one is saying, well, the Bible says, not no one, people are certainly saying it, but often people are just making the same arguments I do about when life begins. This is a scientific reality that life begins at fertilization. The question is not when does life begin, it's which human beings deserve human rights and the right to live free from violence. And they can make the exact same arguments that I do, and people will be like, you go to church. Done. That's where you're basing this off of. And I'm so sympathetic to that, because that would drive me crazy. And so it is nice to just be able to shut it down and be like, no, that's not true. I'm not. That's not where I'm from. This is what I believe. And I think it is convenient. And I welcome people to point people to us. Like, just when someone's hitting you with that accusation, be like, yeah, sure, I'm Christian, but that's not why I'm pro-life. It might be part of it, but it's not the only reason to be pro-life. At Secular Pro-Life, go look at them. They're saying the same stuff I am.
Yeah.
And like, we're happy to do that. And I find myself frustrated by it, like, especially when I talk to college students, that I don't like that my arguments, or Monica Snyder, our executive director, that we are taken with more credence because of our lack of belief in God, our atheism, or any other like identity politics type thing. Like being recognized as someone who is not the traditional pro-lifer often lets people think about abortion for the first time. And so it's interesting, because in my real life, like outside of the anti-abortion context, being an atheist is not an important part of my identity. Like I sort of compare it to like my lack of belief in God is like as important to me as the fact that I don't like guacamole that much. Like it's not something that's at the top of my mind. If I'm at a guacamole convention and everyone's trying to get me to eat guacamole, then I'm like, I really don't like guacamole. I don't want anything to do with this. But like I'm not thinking about it. It's not part of my life. And
Yeah.
so I find myself frustrated that I have to play that identity politics game of like, no, this is what I believe. Also, like I believe these other liberal things that you might agree with. And I
Yes.
wish that people were able to, listen to the old conservative, straight Christian white guy and,
And
hear
I'm
out his
conscious.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
Go on.
the argument is still sound, but the reality is we are just more likely to listen to people who are like us. And so it's
Yes.
important to display in what ways we have common ground. And so I'm going to keep doing that. But I'm frustrated because I wish that, I don't think that because someone is Christian, that undermines their belief on anything.
Should be a level playing field. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm conscious as you're saying all that, Herb, I'm conscious that as a pro-lifer who is also Catholic, I would very much place emphasis on praying to end abortion, but also acting upon, as you do, acting upon ending abortion. But one thing I think we maybe find is that maybe some believing Christians stop at praying and maybe see that as a default position and aren't doing enough, as you are, quite literally putting your body in between the unborn child and the abortionist that wishes to kill it. All they're doing is praying. And of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine you don't pray. So your only choice is to act.
Yeah. No, and I'm not gonna devalue or undermine prayer as something worth doing. It's not something I do, but I think it can be a source of a way to get energy and a way to feel inspired to go do action. But I hope it's that. I hope it's not just
complemented by action.
Now, my work's done, right?
Yes.
And so I definitely have felt that frustration. Like, I meet someone, I find out they're pro-life. Like, what do you do about it? Nothing.
Yes.
That's frustrating for me. I find myself that I almost like, I'm able to get along better with people who are pro-abortion. Like they support abortion. They're willing to go to the Women's March about it. They actually care about this. Like I feel I relate to them more than I do someone who is like, no, I think abortion's bad, but I don't really do anything about it. Like,
well, exactly.
Like I don't know. I think that we live in a world where one of two things is true. Either thousands of babies are being murdered every day. Every day they are being violently killed. Or there are a bunch of like old white men who want to control women's bodies. And if that's the case, if abortion isn't murder, then I'm really mad about that too. That's messed up. Women should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies if it's not hurting anyone. And if abortion isn't murder, then I'm pro-abortion. I don't come out on that side because I recognize the reality that abortion is the violence that it is. Yeah. But for people not to be super agitated on this issue one way or the other, it drives me crazy because the polling shows that about half of this country, and Pew asks every couple of years, do you identify as pro-life or pro-choice? And about half, it bounces from 48 to 51 every couple of years. It shifts a little, but about half of the country says, I'm pro-life, not pro-choice. And to me, that means there's 150, 160 million people who think that thousands of babies are being murdered every day and do nothing about it. That is unbelievable.
Exactly.
Like this to me is the human rights crisis of our lifetime. It is the historical battle for justice that we are living under. And I really believe that when I'm old with grandkids, they're going to be like, what were you doing when babies were being killed?
Yes, exactly.
And I don't want to say nothing.
Yeah.
I want to say I was on the side of justice. I worked in this, and that's why you don't have abortions or legal abortion anymore. That's really what I hope to see, because I think that if we come out of this where abortion is criminalized, we live in a society where women don't feel as though it's their only option because they're supported enough by their community. I don't want to look back and be embarrassed for not having done enough.
Yes, exactly. Now, Herb, finally, what would you say to pro-lifers who say that there needs to be a recognition of the inherent sanctity of all human life if we're to advance any meaningful arguments against abortion?
fundamentally disagree, based on the fact that, like I said, we live in a pluralistic society. I think that if your belief system, if the way that you engage with politics and philosophy is based on underlying beliefs about the sanctity of life, which implies a creator, I think that that's fine, and I respect that belief system, and I understand that a whole lot of people come from that perspective. But I just don't think it's accurate that it's necessary, because take a look, like if you speak to atheists in your life, if you have atheists in your life, which I assume you do, I guarantee you none of them think that like sex trafficking and domestic violence and murder of adults, in cases other than self-defense, are justified because they don't believe in the sanctity of life, or they wouldn't put it that way. They wouldn't use that language. They would instead think of in terms of human rights and social justice. And I think that I have found that being able to speak the same language as someone, in a secular context, is more effective, because I'm
Yes.
not telling them you need to change your entire belief system. I'm not saying like, listen, you believe all of these things, especially if they are, left leaning, and like
Yeah.
you need to come on board and be totally in support of the right wing agenda and the Republican Party and Christianity, because that's a big ask. That's asking them to change a whole lot about what they believe. What I'm asking them is to look at what they believe and see if abortion, as it truly is, not in the slogans and the way that it's obfuscated into just making someone not pregnant. If you look at the victims of abortion, if you learn about what the methods are used, the violent methods of ending the life of a human embryo or fetus, see if that fits into what you already believe. Because I guarantee you, most people already think that they support human rights. They oppose unnecessary violence against children, right? And
And you
so my
mentioned,
ask is,
sorry, Herb, you mentioned earlier it's founded on injustice. Now, a
yeah,
natural response to injustice, I would say, is anger. In your view, how do pro-lifers channel that anger into the much needed action that we've spoken about?
yeah, that's a good question. I think everyone needs to look into what they individually, this is to borrow like Christian language, but like feel called to do. I think that uh, I don't ever want to tell someone like this is the way to be pro-life. This is the most effective thing you should be doing. Like at Secular Pro-Life, we're out like talking to people, making arguments, making content, and we're not super engaged in the political aspect of it,
Sure.
except sometimes when like a ballot initiative comes up. I
Yes.
think that there are people who are way better at that, and like they should be running for office, and they should be crafting legislation, and they should be lobbying politicians. I think that there are people who just have more like maternal instincts, and they should be at the pregnancy centers. You should be counseling young women who are facing crisis. Like I don't think that's where I fit in the best, but I'm not going to say that that work is not as important as what I'm doing. I think that you just need to find what you are good at, what gives you energy, what you feel passionate about, and do whatever that is. Because for me, it's this. For me, it's making the case. It's
Yes.
talking to people. It's participating on debates on college campuses and
And
trying to change.
does that mean, Herb, that you've kind of put a lid on the affirmative action approach? Or
I'm not saying that. No, I definitely do that. And I participate in sidewalk advocacy. I get
yeah,
outside of the clinics. I
yeah,
know in the
exactly.
UK you're less
We can't
protection.
anymore. Yeah,
Yeah.
200 meters.
So I should probably come there and challenge that, because that's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
here, that is one of the most important ways, and accessible ways. If you live in a state that has an abortion clinic, you can get there. Like if you live
Yes.
within 50 miles of an abortion clinic, get there. And we have some buffer zones. It can be a little difficult sometimes,
Sure.
but there are ways to be there. And when you are out there, I don't know. I know so many women who say like, I got an abortion. I regret my abortion. My abortion has traumatized me. And if there was just one person in my life who told me you can do it, who instead of saying this is your only option, like you can have kids later, you're not ready, blah, blah, blah. Everything that women hear, because abortion is legal, it makes it expected when it is not the perfect circumstances to have a child, which it almost never is. They need one person to say, no, you can do this.
To be
and
that
we
positive
can
influence.
here.
Yeah.
And that's what being out on the sidewalks is about. It's not about, like calling women names or,
Yes.
like shaming them for having sex and getting an abortion. It's about saying, hey, we are here and we can help you. And we think it's wrong that you think that this is your only option. To pay someone to harm your child is not going to solve the problems in your life.
And I think you've summed it up there. Irrespective of people's talents, there is something that every pro-lifer can do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever brings you joy, whatever makes you feel like you're making a difference, I encourage you to do that. Like, I want everyone to be like me. I want everyone to believe all the things I believe, right? Like, obviously, it's the nature of, being an activist. But I can recognize that there are people who are way better at things than I'll ever be, like working at a pregnancy center, like political lobbying. And I encourage them to do that because it's not my place.
Yes.
And I'm going to keep doing what I'm good at. Like, if you're a super right-wing Christian, maybe you're not the person who should be talking to leftist college students, right? Like, maybe you're not going to make the best argument to them. You can still try it if you think you're doing a good job, but I feel like that's where I belong, and I do a good job at making this case. So I'm going to keep doing it.
And thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Sorry, Herb, we're going to have to cut you short there. But
you're good.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your work that even got you to the position where you were behind bars. And thank God you're not anymore. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for watching SPUC TV. If you're enjoying our content, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications.
A 75-year-old grandmother and long-time pro-life advocate has been cleared of all charges after becoming the first person arrested under Scotland's controversial buffer zone legislation. Rose Doherty was detained in February while standing outside the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow, holding a sign that read, "Coercion is a crime, here to talk only if you want." Her peaceful presence was deemed to breach the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Act, introduced last year to prohibit any activity considered capable of influencing women seeking abortions within 200 metres of clinics. The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service has now confirmed it will take no further action. Mrs. Doherty, who had refused to accept a formal warning because she believed it was unjust, welcomed the decision, calling it a victory for common sense. She went on, "I just did what I thought was right. To be warned for standing on the streets of Glasgow, offering to have a conversation if anyone wants to speak, it just seems preposterous." Mrs. Doherty insisted there was no need for new legislation, arguing that existing laws already allowed police to deal with genuine cases of harassment or intimidation. There is nothing intimidatory or harassing about an elderly woman standing by the roadside offering to lend a listening ear, she said. SPUC strongly criticised buffer zones as an attack on freedom of speech and the right to offer help to vulnerable women. This case highlights the dangers of criminalising compassion. Peaceful volunteers, many of them elderly, are being treated like criminals simply for offering information and support. The dropping of charges against Mrs. Doherty is welcome, but the law remains deeply unjust. Buffer zones prevent women from hearing about alternatives to abortion at a time when they may feel pressured or coerced. The Scottish Government insists the law is necessary to protect women from unacceptable abuse, but critics maintain it is an overreach that silences peaceful dissent. Reflecting on her experience, Rose Doherty remains undeterred. "Life moves on," she said, "but I won't be constrained by fear. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right." For pro-life campaigners, her case is a reminder that the battle over free speech and the right to offer help at the clinic gates is far from over. A groundbreaking 2025 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association has revealed that survival rates for extremely premature babies, those born at just 22 weeks, are steadily increasing thanks to advances in neonatal care. The findings justify a reassessment of abortion laws that still permit the deliberate ending of pregnancies at this stage of development and beyond. The study, which analysed outcomes for nearly 59,000 premature infants between 2014 and 2023, found that survival among 22-week babies who received active treatment rose from 25.7% to 41%. Even among those not given active treatment, survival climbed from 7.4 to 32%. Rates for 23-week babies also improved, with survival rising to nearly 58% when active treatment was provided. Science is proving what we have long believed, that these tiny babies are capable of life if given the chance, said SPUC CEO John Deegan. He added, every percentage point in survival represents real children, real families, and the triumph of life over impossible odds. Active treatment includes interventions such as assisted breathing, intubation, ventilation, chest compressions, and medications like epinephrine. The sharp increase in coalition's willingness to intervene at 22 weeks signals a growing recognition that these children are viable human beings deserving of care. For the pro-life movement, the findings underscore a deep moral contradiction. While doctors fight to save babies born at 22 weeks in neonatal units, abortion remains legal in many US states until 24 weeks, the same as the legal limit in the UK. As John Deegan has pointed out, this research exposes the inhumanity of abortion laws that treat viable babies as disposable. At the very same gestational age when a baby can survive outside the womb with medical care, she can also be legally aborted by dismemberment. That is a tragic double standard. As debates over legalising medically assisted suicide intensify in the UK, the Canadian experience shines a stark warning, which Parliament in the UK must heed. According to a Christian Today report, Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying, MAID programme, legalised in 2016, now accounts for almost 5% of all deaths, overtaking fatalities from diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. Initially restricted to the terminally ill, MAID eligibility has since expanded to include individuals with serious but non-life-threatening conditions. And in just 2 years, it may extend to those suffering from mental illnesses and potentially even minors. An SPUC spokesperson responded, Canada's MAID trajectory illustrates exactly the slippery slope we've warned about. What began as an option of last resort for the terminally ill has morphed into a programme embracing those in despair, loneliness, or non-fatal illnesses. No safeguard is immune. These developments echo concerns raised by the Nuffield Trust, which notes that international models often follow this pattern, moving from narrow, restricted frameworks toward broader criteria without reversing course. In Canada, critics, notably from the United Nations and disability rights advocates, have slammed MAID's rapid expansion, citing insufficient safeguards, potential devaluation of disabled lives, and insufficient oversight. Further compounding these concerns are reports of doctors wrestling with ethical dilemmas as they carry out medically assisted deaths for vulnerable individuals, including the homeless, those suffering from obesity, and people burdened by financial hardship. These are not isolated incidents. This expansion is inevitable, said SPUC's Michael Robinson. When society offers death as a solution to poverty, illness, or isolation, it betrays its duty to care. Instead of importing Canada's mistakes, the UK must resist pressure to legalise assisted suicide and commit to better palliative care, true compassion, and preserving the dignity of every human life. 3 Republican senators have formally requested that US Attorney General Pam Bondi launch an investigation into whether abortion pill manufacturers misrepresented mifepristone's safety and effectiveness, raising serious public health and ethical concerns. Senators Steve Daines, Montana, Marsha Blackburn, Tennessee, and Jim Banks of Indiana warned of a serious public health failure that endangers countless American women. They cited emerging data suggesting women who take mifepristone experience serious adverse effects at rates 22 times higher than those the FDA-approved drug label indicates. We write to you regarding a serious public health failure. In light of new data, we request an investigation into whether drug manufacturers have misrepresented mifepristone's safety and efficacy, placing hundreds of thousands of women at risk, the senators wrote. They highlighted that about 2/3 of all US abortions now involve mifepristone combined with misoprostol. Despite safety regulations being eased in 2016 and again in 2023, the senators questioned whether the FDA collaborated properly with Danco Laboratories, the manufacturer of Mifeprex, in assessing clinical data prior to relaxed oversight. A person's opinion about abortion is irrelevant, the senators emphasised. This is a woman's health and safety issue. They urged the Department of Justice to act swiftly if criminal or civil misconduct occurred. Further, the senators criticised the FDA's relaxation of reporting requirements on abortion pill-related complications, asserting that these exemptions keep patients in the dark and inhibit their ability to make informed health decisions. The call for investigation resonates with growing pro-life advocacy for enhanced scrutiny of chemical abortion practices. It reflects concerns that prioritising convenience or ideological aims over safety can lead to serious consequences. Finally, India held its 4th annual March for Life earlier this month in the city of Bangalore. More than 2,000 marchers joined the event from almost 200 dioceses across India. The march, which was supported by SPUC, began with a message from SPUC Chief Executive John Deegan being read out to the gathering. He wished the marchers well and promised future collaboration with the pro-life movement in India. That's SPUC TV News, bringing to light what others hide.
The recent stories which have come to light of countless rape gangs across the UK and the total failure of the authorities to tackle them led to the UK government appointing Baroness Louise Casey to undertake a national audit of the nature, scale and characteristics of gang-based exploitation. It's worth taking a moment to consider one of her comments. She said, that term group-based child sexual exploitation is actually a sanitised version of what it is. I want to set it out in unsanitised terms. We are talking about multiple sexual assaults committed against children by multiple men on multiple occasions, beatings and gang rapes. As Baroness Casey has suggested, sanitised versions of the story have been far more widespread than honest reporting. All too often terms like assaults or abuse have been used to avoid confronting the reality of mass gang rapes taking place here in the UK and the horrific consequences of them, including abortion on an enormous scale. I'm Catherine Mokler and this is Viewpoint. Maggie Oliver is an ex-police officer who had been raising this issue for 22 years and who established the Maggie Oliver Foundation to empower victims of childhood sexual abuse and exploitation, including the hundreds of victims of rape gangs. What drew me to her story was how the gangs were found out. She mentions Operation Augusta, which was an investigation into abuse in Manchester, where she discovered clusters of gangs that were bringing girls into other towns for more abuse. In 2024, they had up to 100 suspects, most of whom were men of Asian ethnicity. Again, the Casey report is clear and points out that authorities have, in Baroness Casey's words, shied away from recording or identifying ethnic identity, although she goes on to point out that she found disproportionate numbers of men from Asian ethnic backgrounds among suspects. In the case of the Manchester gangs, after Maggie Oliver returned to work from looking after her sick husband, she was told that the 97 abusers only received a warning under the Child Abduction Act, and the 26 victims received no justice. They deliberately closed down the case and wouldn't put resources into it. In 2010, one of Maggie's colleagues discovered an aborted baby stored in a freezer where evidence was normally held for police. A detective chief superintendent told Maggie that the baby belonged to a 13-year-old girl called Ruby, who in 2009 was raped by a married father of 3. Ruby had gone to an abortion centre for an abortion where a member of staff phoned the police. When the police arrived, they took the aborted baby away as evidence but did nothing with it. They put it in a freezer for about a year until it was found. Maggie was obviously horrified that they had left their biggest piece of evidence, an innocent dead baby, in a freezer while a dangerous predator was on the loose. Despite this, Maggie persevered and managed to work with Ruby's sister Amber. After some months getting to know them, Ruby finally disclosed to Maggie that she was raped from the ages of 12 to 14 by 6 men. Ruby, who had special needs, also said there had been a list on the door of the room where she was raped with the names of men who had raped her and other girls. At this point, Maggie went to the head of Greater Manchester Police, Chief Constable Peter Fahey, but was warned to be very careful about what she chose to do with the information she'd uncovered. Soon afterwards, Maggie sent in a grievance to Greater Manchester Police accusing the force of knowingly failing in their duty to properly investigate the horrendous crimes of child sexual exploitation. She believed they were allowing offenders to escape justice and failing to protect the most vulnerable in society. In May 2012, 9 men were convicted of being part of a child sexual exploitation ring in Greater Manchester. Among them was Ruby's rapist, who received 8 years after he was charged with the lesser offence of conspiracy to engage in sexual activity with a child, even though he had fathered a child with her. In October 2012, Maggie resigned from Greater Manchester Police to tell her story. She has been a voice for the voiceless in her decade-long fight for justice since then. Commenting on Baroness Casey's report, Home Secretary Yvette Coopers said that she had identified a deep-rooted failure to treat children as children and a continued failure to protect children and teenage girls from rape, exploitation and serious violence. The Home Secretary also pointed out that on an ethnicity data, Casey reported a continued failure to gather proper, robust national data. Yet local police data revealed clear evidence of overrepresentation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men in rape gang cases. The appalling trend to me seems that those in power were tough on children and not tough on those abusing them. It had to take discovering the body of a dead baby in a freezer for the rest of the pieces to click. This story should unite every one of us to end violence against children, both born and unborn. We don't want these sick crimes to happen, and we want justice no matter how long it takes. Tragically, the barbaric reality of exploitation and abortion is that predators can now use the pills by post service to further conceal their crimes and abuse their victims. In reality, it's all too easy for abortion pills to be falsely obtained under the pills by post scheme, enabling abusers to coerce women into abortions. At a recent parliamentary event hosted by SPUC, we presented the findings of a project devised to see how easily abortion pills can be obtained under false pretenses from providers over the phone. A team of 26 volunteers made a total of 85 phone calls that provided fake information and profiles. In all 26 cases, pills were successfully obtained through the post. The event, titled Pilled by Post, an abuser's secret weapon, also exposed how dangerous the pills by post policy is. SPUC has also continued to warn about the reality of abortion coercion, which as many as 15% of British women, according to a BBC poll, say that they have experienced in some form. The Casey report and more grooming gang prosecutions have brought to light not just the horrific consequences of this type of exploitation, but also it has led to abortion on an enormous scale. Maggie Oliver has created a campaign called #TheyKnew, where barristers, lawyers and investigators aim to highlight failures as they speak to victims and survivors within the system in a bid to support them. It's clear we need to push for new laws, funding and leadership that actually prioritises child protection. Silence is complicity, whether it's sexual abuse, trafficking or coerced abortion. The common thread is the systematic exploitation of the vulnerable. And what continues to haunt me is the question, how many more children could have been protected if these warnings had been taken seriously years ago? There's a quote from one of my favourite films, which is The Sound of Freedom, about Tim Ballard, who rescued thousands of children from trafficking. And he says, "It's funny because we all read history and we think, oh, I would have risen up, I would have fought, I would have been an abolitionist." And I tell them, no, you wouldn't have. If you would have, you'd be doing that right now. You know, trafficking exists. You've heard of it, but you don't want to look. We all need to make sure we don't fall into the trap of silence.
That's all we have time for this week. If you enjoyed the show, then please like, comment and subscribe for weekly videos. And if you have any stories you think that we should cover, then please email us at the address on screen or in the description. Thank you for watching.